What's up, everybody? I hope y'all are having a wonderful day. I'm Anthony. On today's video, we're going to be talking about food security, more specifically your first line of defense to make sure that whatever food you have, you can keep. And I'm talking more along the lines of gardening. I'll explain later, but I had made a whole bunch of mistakes early on when I started doing this, and I wanted to go ahead and show you on video so you don't make those same mistakes. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Now, first things first, I want to go ahead and specify it doesn't matter what you happen to be preparing for. If you are a homesteader, if you are a self-reliant person, or if you're somebody who just wants to take that food chain and bring it back to your house. This video can apply to all y'all, so don't think it's just like prepping related, because it's not. Now, it is no secret, whenever you start to grow your own food, one of the biggest issues that everybody's going to have to deal with, aside from things like lack of water and lack of maintenance, is going to be keeping that food from other things trying to eat it so you can eat it. All right, one of the biggest culprits in my location, since I live in South Carolina, is going to be deer. Deer are a humongous problem here. All right, they are everywhere, and they come out at night nocturnally when you can't hunt or shoot them, and they will destroy your garden. Absolutely. So you have to think of ways to defend your garden from pests like that, among other things. So what's the best solution, in my opinion? Build one of those. If you've been watching my channel for any length of time, you know that every time I show the garden, there's always a fence around it. But you might notice something a little bit different. I have revamped it, and I'm going to go ahead and explain why. The biggest reason is when Hurricane Ian came through, all of the wind that we were getting, it was only about 45 to 50 miles per hour gusts, but it was enough to make my fence that I had break. Now, how is that possible? It's better to just show you. Now, that picture was this pole before I replaced it. The fence was kind of keeping it still sitting upright, but in reality it wasn't really doing anything, because all you had to do was push it and it would come tumbling down. So if a deer, squirrel, cat, whatever even jumped on the fence, the whole side would just go whoop, right down. Now, how it got that way is I made a crucial mistake. All right, 6 years ago when I built that fence back in 2016, like early spring, I built that fence because I had a big problem earlier in 2015 when I tried to plant a garden and realized that I was competing with deer. What ended up happening, I've said this before in many videos, I planted 48 pea plants, all right, 46 to 48 pea plants, all along a trellis, every 2 inches. They grew about this tall. I went inside for the night, came back out the next morning to water them, and I went from 48 to 2. They were nipped off, every single one of them. Deer love peas. It's one of the things that people grow for food plots, so of course they're going to absolutely attack whatever you have. Same thing when it comes to brassicas, any greens, most likely the deer are going to demolish things. Things like strawberries, a favorite of theirs, those will be gone too. So you have to consider ways that you're going to protect your garden. Now, one of the ways that I did was I built a fence. The first fence I did was about 4 feet tall. Guess what that did? Nothing, because deer can jump very well. So all they did was, hey, I put a 4-foot fence around, because I put metal T-posts in, and they just jumped over. So I walked out the next morning, I had deer prints all inside the garden. Hey, how'd they do that? Oh, they can jump over a 4-foot fence. I got to think about something else. So that brought me to the previous incarnation of this fencing. That fencing was made from landscape timbers. Why? Because I got them for free at the time. So what I did was I put every 10 feet, I did a 20 by 20 garden, every 10 feet I put a landscape timber, and I sunk it into the ground about 20 inches with concrete. I said, okay, we're good. I shouldn't have to worry about this for like 10 years. Well, guess what? That's not the case, because 6 years later, we had a hurricane come through, moderate amount of wind. It wasn't even that much. We usually get more during like a severe thunderstorm. But the fence broke. Why? Because what ends up happening when you sink posts in my area in concrete, it acts like a cup. All right, I've had multiple fence guys tell me this after I did it, and they said they never sink posts in concrete because of this. All it does is it acts like a cup, and whenever it rains, the water's going to run down that post and get into the concrete. When that happens, instead of being able to drain into the surrounding soil, it just holds on to it. When it holds on to it, hey, all of a sudden, the rest of the soil's dry, there's still water and moisture inside that concrete, and all it's doing is facilitating rot. So I ended up with this. This was sunk down in the concrete, and this is where all the moisture sat. So guess what? All the moisture sitting here, all the bacteria, microorganisms can work to degrade this wood, all of a sudden a heavy wind comes by and snapped it right off. And that's ultimately what happened. There are several reasons why I'm mentioning that to y'all. One of the biggest is because you cannot use standard T-posts to make a fence good enough for your garden. We've already established that if you put a 4 or 5 foot fence up, deer are just going to jump over it because they can. It's very easy for them. So if you're trying to keep deer out, a 4 foot fence ain't going to do it, a 5 foot fence ain't going to do it. You need to have at least 6.5, preferably 7 feet high so deer don't even think about it, all right? It's one of those things where they can jump it. And even I've seen 7 foot fences get scaled by deer. Not my local ones, that's why I built it the way I did. So this is about the same height as it was, but like I said, my landscape timbers, they didn't really work. So I had to go end up using 4x4s that were rated for ground contact. When I sunk them in the ground, I didn't use cement this time. I literally just dug down 22 inches and sunk it down in just regular dirt. That way when the water comes down, goes into the soil, and drains off like it normally should. Now, one of the biggest problems that a lot of people are going to see whenever they're trying to make a fence around their garden or where they grow food is the cost, all right? This is not cheap, all right? Fencing itself is very expensive, so you're going to want to skimp and cut a few corners as much as you can so you can build that fence as fast as possible. That's why I ended up using landscape timbers in the first place, because I was able to get them for free because the fencing was expensive enough. However, one thing I wanted to make sure I showed you, because like I said, I made a whole bunch of mistakes, was the importance of doing it right, all right? If you have the opportunity to do it right the first time or slowly do it, that way you can incorporate the correct techniques. You won't have to worry about the same issues that I had. Now, the first thing I would definitely suggest doing is, like I said, putting 4x4s in the ground without using concrete, because the concrete's going to hold water if you live in a climate like mine. Second thing you're going to want to do is you're going to make sure you put some form of support in between all your posts. This is very important, because if you don't do that, what's going to end up happening is when you try to tighten this fencing up, since you're not sinking them down in concrete, the posts are going to want to do this. And you're going to lose tension. It's going to be very sloppy looking, like mine did. So if you put something in between, you're able to really crank down on that fencing to keep it nice and tight. Third mistake I made is when I put these cross supports in last time, I didn't put them in the middle. I put them up top. Now I know you're thinking, hey, that's not big of a deal, but it really is for multiple reasons. Number one, whenever you have something on top, it's acting like a perch. So guess what's going to land on a perch? Birds. Well, I had a whole bunch of birds, like bluebirds and all other things, sitting there waiting to get my blueberries when they ripened. It's almost like they were in line. So putting a perch right there was really just helping them, which was a bad thing. Not to mention, when I was free ranging my birds, guess what else would land right here? Hawks. Hawks would land here, watch the chickens. I'd have to come outside and scare away the hawk before it actually went and attacked the chickens. So that's another bad thing. And third, if you have barn cats like I do, then you want them around to take care of things like mice, voles, rats, squirrels, whatever thing, kind of comes around and tries to poke around your food, because obviously voles are going to chew the bark on fruit trees. So it's good to have a few barn cats around. Well, it almost hurt me whenever I had the post up here, because guess what would happen? The cats would climb here and they would sit on that perch. When they saw a lizard or something that I wanted to keep alive in the garden, they would jump down and attack it. But when you got a freshly turned bed that you just planted all your seeds in 2 days ago, what's the last thing that you want? A cat jumping down 6 feet into the bed, stirring all that up and ruining all your growing. So all that did was it just help them plan their little attacks. So if you don't put a post up here, they can't walk along. There's going to be less likely chance they're going to jump down into your beds. And finally, one of the biggest mistakes that literally bit me every single year, that was just horrible, was the fact that whenever you have a fencing that meets the ground, you have to figure out a way to stop things from growing there. All right, it's nice to be able to have things like cucumbers or peas or beans that can grow up the fence. That's a bonus. But what's not nice is when things like Virginia creeper, briar, all kinds of bad things that will actually infiltrate the garden and ruin your food growing, being able to sneak in where that fence line is, because you can't mow there. And even when you with a weed whacker, you're still not getting everything. So what you need to do before you even start, do this. You need to have a fence. You need to put down some form of landscape cloth. I doubled up here. I put pebbles and I put brick. That way I don't have to worry about any kind of growth happening right here or right there. So I don't have to sit here every single year, every single other week as during the growing season and pulling weeds along this entire length of fence. So this is what I'm talking about. This is where the fence line used to be before I expanded this side of the garden. I went about 6.5 more feet, and I went another kind of an angle, so I got 10 foot here and I'm going at an angle back to the original post. Now, what's happened is you see things like Virginia creeper, things like briar, right there, things like elm trees, all started to grow at that fence line because I couldn't get in there with the mower, and it was very difficult to pull being right next to this raised bed. So by not putting down that layer of landscape fabric and rocks to make sure all this stuff doesn't grow, it ended up costing me so much time in weeding and maintenance that it almost wasn't even worth it. So what I've decided to do, since I've gone back and rebuilt this fence, I'm taking all this stuff out, I'm doing what I showed you earlier, and just putting a whole bunch of rocks down because, again, it is not worth the hassle. So do yourself a favor. If you are planning to build a fence around your garden so deer or whatever cannot get in, make sure that you are putting down things like landscape fabric, something to ensure that nothing's going to grow here. And I'm going to tell you right now, if you're thinking about putting a mulch down, that's also bad. Let me show you why. Okay, so this is one of my beds. I'm growing collard greens in here right now. As you see, I decided to clear everything out of the pathway, put a layer of landscape fabric down and some crushed rock. Why did I do that? Because I put mulch here 2 years ago, so I don't have to worry about weeds growing up in here. Well, what do you think mulch does? It holds in moisture, which is why you mulch fruit trees, because it keeps moisture for the roots. Well, when you have moisture next to wood, especially when you use deck boards like I did, that's going to facilitate rot. And that's exactly what happened. To the point where I had to sit here, after building these beds only 3 years ago, or this bed only 3 years ago, this was 4, I had to go ahead and shore up the bottom with 2x8s because they were already rotting to the point where they were splitting off the side in only 3 years. It doesn't matter what kind of mulch you put down. If you put down pine straw, pine bark, or whatever kind of mulch you might get from your tree service, what's going to happen if you put it inside between the rows, it's going to slowly decompose, it's going to hold a bunch of moisture, and it's all it's going to do is going to facilitate rot on your boards from the outside. That's already going on the inside from the soil touching it. So when a normal standard raised bed might last you 5, 6, 7 years, if you let it rot from both sides, it's going to last much shorter of amount of time. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to make sure that you're keeping everything possible away from these boards so you don't have to do what I did and shore up with 2x8s. Finally, one more point I want to make sure I drive home is the type of fencing matters. For me, because of the location I'm in, my number one concern is deer, because deer eat things like this. They're very prevalent in my area, and they will absolutely destroy everything if you give them the opportunity. Hence why I put fencing as high as I did, and I only used 2x4 inch wire. If you have to deal with things like rabbits, since I have barn cats, they're pretty good at keeping the rabbits away from the garden. But if you have things like rabbits, you are going to want to go into a much smaller ring of wire around the base. They make things like rabbit wire, which at the bottom is 1x1 or 2x2, which gradually morphs into this as it gets towards the top. That way you can keep rabbits out of the garden, and with all the rock down there, especially with the brick around the bottom, they can't dig. That's the whole purpose. Now, one more thing I want to add, if you have things like groundhogs, I don't in my area, they're very good at digging and burrowing under, regardless of whatever you may put right there. So if you are putting down things like raised beds and you want to grow things like carrots, turnips, or whatever, and groundhogs are around, they're going to probably go up under in your bed. So the best way to defend against that is when you build that raised bed, go ahead and lay wire down first before you start layering in your soil. Because if that wire down there, if they try to burrow under, they're gonna hit the wire, can't get your stuff. All right, so I think I'm gonna go ahead and end the video there. If you have any other further questions, if you would like me to go in depth further, just let me know down in the comment section. I will do my best to answer those questions or point you in the right direction. These are some of the things that I noticed from my experiences the last 6 and 7 years that I've had this particular garden built and having to replace the fence and beds already. I've decided to come up with the new solutions to avoid that. So if you don't make my mistakes and you follow some of these solutions that I made already, you can avoid what I just did and save yourself a whole bunch of time. So if this video helped you at all, please do me a humongous favor and give me that thumbs up. It totally helps me out and I would very much appreciate it. Subscribe to the channel if you are not. Share the video with somebody who you think it might help, and I will catch y'all on the next one, okay?